I never thought lying alone in a hospital bed would teach me the harsh truth about my place in my family's heart. The sterile white walls echoed with silence while I waited for my parents to show up after my car accident. Hours turned into a day, then another. The flowers on my bedside table were from colleagues, not family. As I stared at my phone hoping for their call, I had no idea that discovering why they never came would shatter everything I believed about unconditional love. Before I share this painful journey with you, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories that will touch your heart. Now let me take you back to the darkest days of my life, when I finally realized exactly where I stood in my family's priorities. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, I always knew I was living in my older brother's shadow. Marcus was everything our parents, Robert and Linda, had dreamed of in a son. While I struggled through community college studying accounting, he sailed through Harvard Law School with honors. Our modest two-story home was filled with his academic achievements, debate team trophies, and acceptance letters from prestigious firms. My own accomplishments, though respectable, seemed to fade into the background whenever Marcus entered the room. The pattern started early. During high school graduation, my parents spent the entire ceremony talking about Marcus's upcoming internship at a Boston law firm. When I graduated from college with decent grades and landed my first job at a small accounting firm, they barely acknowledged it, because Marcus had just made law review. Family dinners revolved around his cases, his colleagues, his bright future. I learned to accept my role as the reliable, ordinary daughter who would never quite measure up to their golden boy. By 28, I had built a quiet but stable life for myself. Working at Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm downtown, I had slowly climbed from junior accountant to senior staff. My salary was not impressive by Marcus's standards, but I had managed to save $45,000 through years of careful budgeting and living below my means. My one-bedroom apartment in Lakewood was small but clean, and I had been dating David, a teacher at the local elementary school, for 3 years. We talked about marriage, about buying a house together, about building something real and lasting. Despite the constant comparisons and subtle dismissals, I kept trying to maintain connections with my family. I called home every Sunday, sent birthday cards, showed up for holiday gatherings, where conversations inevitably centered on Marcus's latest professional triumph. Deep down, I hoped that one day they would see me as more than just the adequate daughter who paid her bills on time and stayed out of trouble. That Friday evening in late October started like any other. I had stayed late at the office finishing quarterly reports, and rain was pelting the windows as I packed up my desk. The weather forecast had warned of heavy storms, but I needed to get home to walk my neighbor's dog while she was out of town. The drive from downtown Denver to my apartment usually took 30 minutes, but the rain made everything slower and more dangerous. Highway 36 was slick with water, and visibility was poor, despite my windshield wipers working overtime. I was being extra cautious, driving well below the speed limit in the right lane when I approached the intersection near Federal Boulevard. The light was green for me, and I proceeded through without thinking twice. That split second of normalcy was the last moment of my old life. The black SUV came out of nowhere, running the red light at full speed. I caught a glimpse of it in my peripheral vision just before impact, but there was no time to react. The collision sent my small Honda spinning across the wet pavement like a toy. The sound of crushing metal and shattering glass seemed to go on forever. When everything finally stopped moving, I was hanging upside down from my seatbelt, blood running down my face, my left leg screaming with pain. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours as I drifted in and out of consciousness. The paramedics had to cut me out of the wreckage, carefully extracting me while checking for spinal injuries. Through the haze of shock and pain medication, I heard them discussing my condition. Broken left tibia and fibula 3, cracked ribs, mild concussion, multiple lacerations. Serious, but not life-threatening. I would need surgery on my leg, and at least a week in the hospital. From my hospital bed at Presbyterian St. Joseph, with my leg elevated and wrapped in temporary splints, I managed to call home with shaking hands. My father answered on the third ring, and his voice immediately filled with concern when I told him about the accident. He asked detailed questions about my injuries, and the other driver promising that he and Mom would drive up from Colorado Springs first thing in the morning. The relief in his voice when I assured him I would be okay gave me comfort during that first frightening night. For once, I felt like their priority. The first 24 hours in the hospital passed in a blur of medical procedures, pain medication, and anxious glances toward the door. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, my heart would jump expecting to see my parents rushing in with worried faces and comforting words. The nurses kept asking about my emergency contacts, and I kept assuring them that my family would be there soon. But as Friday night became Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon stretched into evening, the empty chair beside my bed became a symbol of something I was not ready to acknowledge. My leg surgery was scheduled for Sunday morning, and I spent Saturday night unable to sleep, partly from pain and partly from growing anxiety about why my parents had not shown up. I had called their house multiple times, but only reached the answering machine. Maybe their car had broken down. Maybe they had gotten sick. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation that I was too medicated to think of. I clung to these possibilities like lifelines, refusing to consider alternatives that would hurt too much to contemplate. When my phone rang Sunday morning, I grabbed it eagerly, expecting to hear my mother's apologetic voice explaining their delay. Instead, it was Marcus calling from what sounded like a noisy restaurant or bar. His tone was casual, almost cheerful, as he asked how I was feeling and whether the doctors had given me a timeline for recovery. As we talked, I could hear clinking glasses and laughter in the background, which seemed oddly festive for someone whose sister was lying in a hospital bed. Then, without thinking, Marcus mentioned something that stopped my heart. He was talking about the amazing weekend he was having in Chicago, how proud he was of his achievement, how incredible the ceremony had been the night before. When I asked what ceremony, he laughed and said he thought I knew about the Lawyer of the Year award he had received from the Illinois State Bar Association. The timing became clear with horrible precision. The awards dinner had been Saturday night, the same night I had surgery scheduled, the same night I had been lying alone wondering where my family was. The phone felt heavy in my hand as Marcus continued talking, describing the elegant hotel ballroom, the distinguished guests, how emotional Mom had gotten during his acceptance speech. He mentioned that Dad had taken dozens of photos and that they were planning to frame the certificate for their living room wall. Every detail felt like a physical blow. While I had been preparing for surgery, my parents had been watching my brother receive applause from strangers. While I had been wondering if anyone cared whether I lived or died, they had been celebrating his professional success. Marcus seemed genuinely surprised when I asked why they had not come to see me instead. In his mind, there was no conflict. The award ceremony was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, something he had worked toward for years. My accident, while unfortunate, was clearly not serious, since I was able to call and talk normally. He even suggested that the timing was lucky since they could celebrate his achievement and then come visit me afterward without missing anything important. His casual dismissal of my pain and fear revealed just how little my family understood about what I had been going through. After hanging up with Marcus, I stared at the ceiling tiles and tried to process what I had learned. My parents had made a choice. Faced with their daughter's medical emergency and their son's career milestone, they had chosen the celebration. They had chosen pride over compassion achievement, over need the son who made them look good, over the daughter who required their support. The realization settled in my chest like a cold weight, making it hard to breathe. When I finally called my parents, directly reaching them at their hotel in Chicago, the conversation was even more devastating than I had imagined. My father's voice carried irritation rather than guilt when I asked why they had not come to Denver. He explained as if talking to a child that Marcus's award was extremely important for his career and their family's reputation. They had planned this trip for months, he said, and my accident was clearly not serious enough to warrant changing their plans. My mother added that they would visit me as soon as they returned, bringing flowers and a nice dinner to make up for the delay. Their casual dismissal of my feelings cut deeper than the accident itself. They spoke as if I was being unreasonable for expecting them to prioritize my medical emergency over a social event. When I tried to explain how frightened and alone I had felt, my father interrupted to say that I was being dramatic. After all, I was fine, was I not? The doctors were taking good care of me, and I had insurance to cover the costs. What more did I need? Their words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what family support actually meant. The remaining 3 days I spent in the hospital passed in a haze of physical therapy medication adjustments and emotional numbness. David visited every day after work, bringing homemade soup and staying until visiting hours ended. A few colleagues stopped by with magazines and get-well cards. Even my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, managed to take the bus across town to check on me. But the absence of my parents felt like an open wound that would not heal. When Robert and Linda finally appeared on Wednesday afternoon, carrying expensive flowers and wearing forced smiles, I felt nothing but exhaustion. They filled the small room with chatter about Marcus's award ceremony, showing me pictures on Linda's phone of him shaking hands with judges and attorneys. They described the hotel, the dinner menu, the other award recipients, all while I lay there with my leg in a cast, realizing that even their visit was really about Marcus's success. Their apologies were brief and superficial, focused more on justifying their absence than acknowledging the impact it had on me. Leaving the hospital with crutches and a walking cast was both a relief and a challenge. The physical therapy would take months, but I was determined to regain my independence as quickly as possible. More importantly, I was beginning to understand that my emotional recovery would require some difficult decisions about my relationship with my family. The accident had not just broken my leg, it had shattered my illusions about unconditional love and family loyalty. During the 6 weeks I needed crutches, I made a conscious choice to limit contact with my parents. I stopped calling every Sunday, responding instead to their occasional messages with brief texts about my physical progress. When they invited me to Thanksgiving dinner, I politely declined spending the holiday with David's family instead. His parents, both retired teachers, welcomed me warmly and never once asked why my own family was not there. The contrast was striking and painful. The distance I created was not born from spite, but from a need to protect myself while I healed. Every interaction with Robert and Linda reminded me of my secondary status in their affections. They would call to update me on Marcus's latest case victories or social events, always seeming surprised when I showed little enthusiasm for these reports. They appeared genuinely puzzled by my coolness, as if they could not connect their choice in Chicago to my current emotional state. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life with the people who had actually shown up when I needed them. David proved to be more supportive than I had ever imagined, helping me navigate daily tasks while my leg healed and never making me feel like a burden. My colleagues at Henderson and Associates had covered my workload without complaint, and my boss had held my position open despite the extended absence. These relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine care, began to feel more like family than my biological relatives. 2 years passed in this pattern of limited contact and careful emotional distance. I returned to work full-time, eventually earning a promotion to audit supervisor with a substantial salary increase. David and I moved in together, combining our savings to buy a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood near his school. We got engaged on the 2nd anniversary of my accident, choosing the date deliberately as a symbol of new beginnings. My ring was simple but meaningful, purchased with money we had saved together rather than family wealth. During this time, Marcus's career continued its upward trajectory. He made partner at Morrison and Associates, one of Denver's most prestigious law firms specializing in corporate law and investment advice. According to my parents' occasional updates, he had opened his own practice focusing on high net worth clients and complex financial transactions. His success was undeniable, and I genuinely felt happy for him even as I maintained emotional distance from the family celebration that always surrounded his achievements. Then on a Tuesday evening in March, my phone rang with a call that would change everything again. My father's voice was barely recognizable, shaking with panic and desperation. Marcus had been arrested that afternoon by federal agents on charges of securities fraud and conspiracy. The investigation had been ongoing for months, but they had just learned about it when FBI agents appeared at his office with handcuffs and search warrants. The charges were serious, Robert said, involving something called a Ponzi scheme that had defrauded investors of over $2.3 million. As my father explained what little he understood about the situation, a picture emerged that was both shocking and somehow inevitable. Marcus had been providing legal advice to an investment firm called Rocky Mountain Capital Partners, helping them structure deals and recruit wealthy clients. What he had not told his family and what prosecutors now alleged was that he knew the firm was operating a fraudulent scheme that promised unrealistic returns while using new investor money to pay earlier clients. When the scheme collapsed, hundreds of people lost their retirement savings, and Marcus was facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The phone call lasted over an hour, with Robert alternating between disbelief and desperate strategizing. They had already mortgaged their house in Colorado Springs to hire a criminal defense attorney, but the lawyer was saying that Marcus needed the best possible representation if he had any hope of avoiding a long prison sentence. The family's savings were exhausted, their credit cards maxed out, and they were facing the possibility of losing everything they had worked for over 40 years. Near the end of our conversation, Robert's voice took on a tone I had never heard before, a combination of pleading and entitlement that made my stomach turn. He reminded me of how close our family had always been, how we had always supported each other through difficult times. He mentioned my stable job, my savings account, my lack of major financial obligations. Then, with devastating directness, he asked if I would consider lending them $50,000 to hire the top criminal defense attorney in Colorado, a man who specialized in federal fraud cases and had successfully defended several high-profile clients. The request hung in the air like a toxic cloud. After years of being treated as the family afterthought after being abandoned during my own crisis, they were now asking me to sacrifice my financial security to save Marcus from the consequences of his own choices. Robert's argument was both emotionally manipulative and logically flawed. He spoke of family obligation, of the love I owed my brother, of the tragedy that would befall all of them if Marcus went to prison. But he never acknowledged the bitter irony of asking me, the daughter they had neglected, to rescue the son they had always favored. The next few days brought a barrage of phone calls and text messages from both parents. Linda called sobbing, describing Marcus as a victim of circumstances beyond his control, insisting that a good lawyer could prove his innocence and restore their family's reputation. She painted pictures of holiday gatherings ruined forever, of grandchildren who would grow up ashamed of their father, of a brilliant career destroyed by a simple mistake in judgment. Her emotional manipulation was relentless, designed to make me feel guilty for having money while they suffered. But even as my parents pleaded their case, I was doing my own research into Marcus's situation. The federal complaint was public record, and the details it contained were far more damaging than my family had admitted. This was not a case of innocent mistake or poor judgment. The evidence showed that Marcus had been actively involved in recruiting investors, had helped structure fraudulent documents, and had continued promoting the scheme even after he suspected its illegal nature. Most damning of all, the investigation revealed that he had quietly warned several of his personal friends to withdraw their investments weeks before the scheme collapsed, protecting his inner circle while leaving other clients to lose everything. The man described in these federal documents was not the naive victim my parents portrayed, but a calculating participant who had knowingly enriched himself while others lost their life savings. His luxury purchases over the past 2 years suddenly made sense: the $800,000 house, the Tesla, the frequent trips to Europe. He had been living off money stolen from retirees and working families, and now my parents wanted me to help fund his defense using money I had earned through honest work and careful savings. The confrontation I had been avoiding for 2 years finally arrived when I agreed to meet my parents at their house to discuss Marcus's situation face to face. The drive from Denver to Colorado Springs gave me time to prepare mentally for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. David had offered to come with me for support, but I felt this was something I needed to handle alone. The family dynamics that had shaped my entire life were finally coming to a head. Walking into my childhood home felt surreal after months of limited contact. The living room walls were still covered with Marcus's achievements, his law degree, professional awards, photographs from various ceremonies and celebrations. Notably absent were any pictures from my college graduation, my job promotions, or my engagement. The visual representation of family priorities was stark and undeniable, a museum dedicated to their golden child, while I remained essentially invisible in their narrative. Robert and Linda were waiting in the kitchen, looking older and more frail than I remembered. The stress of Marcus's situation had clearly taken a physical toll, and I felt a momentary pang of sympathy before remembering why I was there. They had prepared coffee and arranged papers across the table: legal documents, financial statements, estimates from defense attorneys. The presentation felt formal, almost like a business meeting, which perhaps reflected how they really saw our relationship. I listened quietly as they outlined their plan for Marcus's defense. They had researched the attorney they wanted to hire, a man named Jonathan Hayes, who had successfully defended several white-collar criminals in federal court. His retainer was $50,000, with additional fees likely to reach 6 figures if the case went to trial. They had calculated exactly how much they needed from me, had prepared arguments about family loyalty, and mutual obligation, had even drafted a promissory note outlining repayment terms that we all knew they would never be able to meet. When they finished their presentation and looked at me expectantly, I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them about the night of my accident, about lying in the hospital bed waiting for them to arrive, about learning that they had chosen Marcus's award ceremony over my medical emergency. I described the loneliness and fear I had experienced, the realization that I would always be second priority in their hearts. I explained how that experience had forced me to reevaluate our entire relationship and recognize patterns of favoritism that had shaped my entire life. Robert's reaction was immediate and defensive. He accused me of being petty and resentful, of holding grudges over minor slights that any mature person would have forgiven. He insisted that the award ceremony had been important for the entire family's reputation, that my accident was clearly not life-threatening, and that I was being dramatic about something that had happened years ago. His dismissive tone revealed that even now, faced with their desperate need for my help, he could not acknowledge the emotional damage they had caused or take responsibility for their choices. Linda tried a different approach, crying and pleading while describing the shame and humiliation she would feel if Marcus went to prison. She talked about how their friends would judge them, how she would not be able to show her face at church or social gatherings. She painted herself as the real victim in this situation, the innocent mother whose world was being destroyed by circumstances beyond her control. Her self-pity was breathtaking in its scope, completely ignoring the actual victims of Marcus's crimes or my own legitimate grievances about our family dynamic. Then I dropped the bombshell that silenced both of them. I had researched Marcus's case thoroughly, I told them, and I knew exactly what he had done. This was not a case of mistaken judgment or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus had knowingly participated in a scheme that stole millions from hardworking people, many of them retirees who lost their entire life savings. He had lived luxuriously off stolen money while his victims struggled with financial ruin. I would not use my honestly earned savings to help a criminal escape justice for his deliberate crimes. The room erupted in angry denials and accusations. Robert called me selfish and vindictive, claiming that I was destroying our family out of spite. Linda sobbed that I was condemning my brother to a life in prison when I had the power to save him. They both insisted that Marcus was essentially innocent, that any mistakes he had made were minor, compared to the real criminals who had led him astray. Their complete inability to acknowledge his guilt or accept responsibility for their own parenting failures was staggering. I stood up to leave, but not before delivering the message I had come to share. I told them that I would not be contributing money to Marcus's defense, that I would not be attending family gatherings where his situation dominated conversation, and that I would not be maintaining the pretense that we were a close family when their actions had consistently proved otherwise. The money they wanted was earmarked for my wedding, my future home improvements, and my own financial security. I had earned it through honest work, and I would spend it on people who actually valued my presence in their lives. The aftermath of our confrontation was swift and brutal. Within hours of leaving their house, I received angry text messages accusing me of selfishness, heartlessness, and betrayal. Robert sent a particularly vicious message claiming that I had never been a real daughter to them, that my attitude proved I did not deserve to be part of their family. Linda's messages were more manipulative, describing in detail how Marcus's children would suffer if their father went to prison, how I would have to live with the knowledge that I could have prevented their pain. The extended family quickly chose sides, with most relatives supporting my parents' position without understanding the full context. Aunts and uncles called to lecture me about family loyalty. Cousins posted passive-aggressive social media messages about the importance of supporting each other during difficult times. The unified front against me was overwhelming, but it also confirmed that I had made the right choice. These people had never really known or understood me. They only valued me for what I could provide when needed. Marcus himself never contacted me directly, which somehow hurt more than all the angry messages from everyone else. Even facing prison, even needing my financial help, he could not bring himself to acknowledge our relationship or ask for my assistance personally. His silence spoke volumes about how he viewed our sibling bond and reinforced my decision to protect my own interests rather than sacrifice for someone who saw me as irrelevant to his life. The legal proceedings moved forward without my financial contribution, and the outcome was exactly what the evidence had predicted. Marcus was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. My parents lost their house when they could not make payments on the mortgage they had taken out for his legal fees. They moved to Kansas to live with Linda's sister, an arrangement that I suspected would strain everyone involved, but which was their only viable option. The family I had known for 28 years effectively ceased to exist. Robert and Linda made it clear that they blamed me for Marcus's imprisonment and wanted no further contact. Some relatives maintained relationships with all parties, but most felt forced to choose sides and chose the parents who positioned themselves as victims rather than the daughter who had established reasonable boundaries. The silence that followed was initially painful, but gradually became a relief. The first year after cutting ties with my family was emotionally challenging in ways I had not anticipated. Despite their rejection and years of preferential treatment toward Marcus, I still felt grief for the relationships I had lost. There were moments of doubt when I wondered if I should have simply given them the money to preserve some connection, even a dysfunctional one. The social conditioning of family loyalty runs deep, and I had to actively remind myself that being related to someone does not obligate you to enable their destructive behavior. David was invaluable during this transition, providing emotional support without trying to fix things or push me toward reconciliation. He had witnessed firsthand how my family treated me and never suggested that I should compromise my principles to maintain relationships that brought me more pain than joy. When I expressed guilt about Marcus's children growing up with their father in prison, David gently reminded me that Marcus himself was responsible for that outcome, not me. The consequences of criminal behavior belong to the criminal, not to family members who refused to fund their defense. Therapy became an important part of my healing process. Working with a counselor who specialized in family trauma helped me understand that my parents' behavior toward me had been emotionally abusive, characterized by favoritism, neglect, and manipulation. I learned that healthy families do not ask one child to sacrifice their financial security to bail out another child's criminal behavior. I began to recognize that my guilt was a product of conditioning rather than rational analysis, and that I deserved relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. As months passed, I discovered unexpected benefits to my new situation. Without the constant stress of disappointing family members or being compared unfavorably to Marcus, my confidence grew substantially. I threw myself into my career with renewed energy, earning another promotion and a significant salary increase. David and I planned our wedding without interference or passive-aggressive comments about guest lists or venue choices. For the first time in my adult life, my decisions were entirely my own. The wedding itself was a small, joyful celebration that perfectly reflected our values and personalities. We invited close friends, David's family, and a few cousins who had remained neutral in the family conflict. The absence of my parents and most relatives was noticeable, but not devastating. Walking down the aisle to marry a man who valued me exactly as I was felt, like the ultimate vindication of my choice to prioritize authentic relationships over genetic obligations. David's family welcomed me completely, never making me feel like a charity case or replacement daughter. His parents treated me with the kind of consistent kindness I had always craved from my own, while his siblings included me naturally in their group activities and family traditions. The contrast highlighted just how abnormal my original family dynamic had been, and how much emotional energy I had wasted trying to earn love that was never truly available. Professional success continued to flourish in this healthier environment. Without family drama consuming my mental energy, I was able to focus completely on my career and personal growth. I completed additional certifications in forensic accounting, which led to consulting opportunities with law enforcement agencies investigating financial crimes. The irony was not lost on me that I was now helping prosecute the same types of crimes Marcus had committed, but it felt like meaningful work that aligned with my values. 3 years after our last conversation, I received a brief letter from Marcus in prison. He had apparently spent considerable time in reflection and wanted to apologize for his crimes and their impact on our family. The letter was carefully written and seemed genuine, acknowledging his responsibility for the fraud and expressing regret for the victims who had lost their savings. However, he never mentioned our personal relationship or the years of being overshadowed in our parents' affections. His apology was limited to his criminal behavior and did not extend to the family dynamics that had contributed to our estrangement. I read the letter multiple times, searching for any recognition of how our family had functioned or his role in maintaining the favoritism that had shaped our relationship. Finding none, I ultimately decided not to respond. Forgiveness was something I was working toward for my own peace of mind, but reconciliation required acknowledgement of all the issues between us, not just the legal ones. His inability to address our personal history suggested that he still did not understand the full impact of our family's dysfunction. The final lesson came 5 years after Marcus's conviction, when I learned through mutual acquaintances that Robert had suffered a heart attack and was hospitalized in Kansas. Linda had called several relatives looking for my contact information, apparently wanting to notify me about his condition and possibly seeking my presence or assistance. I felt sadness about his health crisis, but realized that I felt no obligation to reach out or offer support. They had made their choice about my value to them, and I had accepted that decision. David asked if I wanted to send flowers or a card, and I considered it briefly before deciding against any gesture. False reconciliations served no one's interests, and Robert had never shown any indication that he regretted his treatment of me or wanted to repair our relationship. Participating in crisis-driven contact would only reopen wounds that had finally healed and potentially expose me to fresh manipulation and guilt tactics. Instead, I chose to honor the family I had built, rather than mourn the one I had lost. David and I had started trying to have children, excited about creating the kind of loving, supportive environment we both wanted to provide. My found family of friends and in-laws had proven more reliable and caring than my biological relatives ever had been. The future felt bright and full of possibilities that did not depend on earning anyone else's approval or meeting impossible standards of perfection. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that my car accident was actually a gift disguised as a tragedy. Without that crisis revealing my parents' true priorities, I might have spent decades more trying to win love that was never available while neglecting relationships that offered genuine care and support. The pain of being abandoned in the hospital led directly to the strength that allowed me to refuse their manipulative financial demands and ultimately build a healthier life. The most profound realization was that family is not defined by genetics, but by behavior. The people who show up during your darkest moments, who celebrate your successes without resentment, who accept you exactly as you are, these are your real family regardless of their last names or shared DNA. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from people who cannot or will not value your presence in their lives, even when those people raised you and share your blood. I still struggle occasionally with societal messages about family loyalty and the importance of maintaining relationships with relatives regardless of their treatment of you. But experience has taught me that toxic relationships remain toxic regardless of their origin, and that protecting yourself from emotional harm is not selfishness, but wisdom. Some people are not capable of healthy love, and recognizing that reality is the first step toward finding people who are. The savings account that my parents wanted me to empty for Marcus's defense eventually became the down payment on our dream home, a place where David and I host friends for holidays and create the kind of warm, inclusive atmosphere I had always wanted to experience. Every mortgage payment reminds me that I made the right choice, that investing in my own future and relationships was worth more than funding a criminal's legal defense or maintaining the illusion of family unity. Today, I can honestly say that I am grateful for every difficult moment that led me to this place of authenticity and self-respect. The accident taught me about vulnerability and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who will actually show up when you need them. My family's financial demands taught me about boundaries and the difference between love and manipulation. Marcus's crimes taught me that success without integrity is ultimately worthless, and that character matters more than achievement. My story is not about revenge or bitterness, but about the courage to choose yourself when everyone else expects you to sacrifice for people who have never chosen you. It is about recognizing that you cannot earn love from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving it, and that your worth is not determined by how well you can meet impossible expectations or absorb other people's dysfunction. The relationship you have with yourself sets the standard for all other relationships in your life. When you accept treatment that diminishes your value, you teach others that you are not worthy of respect. When you establish boundaries and enforce them consistently, you attract people who naturally want to treat you well and repel those who only want to exploit your kindness. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who cannot appreciate your worth, even when those people are your own family. Freedom from toxic relationships creates space for healthy ones to flourish, and the peace that comes with authentic living is worth more than any amount of money or temporary family harmony built on lies and denial. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences. Please subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult circumstances and learning to value yourself even when others do not. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better than toxic family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting channels that share real experiences about overcoming family trauma and building healthier relationships. Remember that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to recognize it, and that sometimes the most courageous choice is to save yourself instead of drowning with people who refuse to swim toward shore. Wishing you all the strength to choose authenticity over approval and the wisdom to build relationships that actually nourish your soul.